Hey guys, Dane here. Last summer, I showed you how to build some patio furniture from scratch. Now, I'm going to show you how to build a coffee table to go with it.
DIY Dane.
What we'll need for this table is 3 2x4s and 2 2x3s. For the cuts, we need 5 2x4 boards at 3 feet, 4 2x3 boards at 14 inches, and 4 2x3 boards at 11 inches. To ensure the boards are all the same length, line up each set and clamp them together. Then use an orbit sander with 80 grit sandpaper to smooth out both ends. For the 5 3-foot boards, which will make up the table's top, I went a step further and sanded each end again with 150 grit and 220 grit. These are the grits we'll use for sanding all 4 sides of every board. When building the patio furniture, I waited until it was assembled to sand, which made sanding certain areas like inner corners difficult. So I decided to make it easier this time around by sanding the boards first. Once all the boards are sanded, the next step is drilling pocket holes with the pocket hole jig set. The boards we're using, even though they're 2x4s and 2x3s, are 1.5 inches thick, so we'll be using the 2.5 inch pocket hole screws with the jig and drill set to 1.5. Starting with the legs of the table, we'll line up a pair of 11-inch boards within a pair of 14-inch boards. When we're all done, one side will be facing out and be more visible, so pick which side of each board looks best and place that side face down. We'll drill pocket holes on the less attractive sides. Now we'll drill pocket holes on each side of the 11-inch boards. On one of the boards, whichever will be connected to the tabletop, we're going to cheat the pocket holes toward the bottom or interior side. I'll explain why in a bit. Following the marks, we'll use the jig, clamp, and drill to drill the pocket holes. It's not necessary, but I find it easier to clamp the jig and board together along with the table or whatever platform you're working on to secure the board in place and prevent any shifting while you drill. Once you've drilled the pocket holes in all 4 11-inch boards, we can connect them to the 14-inch boards. For this, we'll use a large clamp to hold them together. Be sure everything is lined up and you have one board with the cheated pocket holes on the inside before drilling in the pocket hole screws. Now we can line up the 2x4s that will make up the table's top. Use a separate board to help line up one end. For my table, I used nails to create evenly spaced gaps between each board, then placed another board on the other end to ensure both ends are lined up as much as possible. I then used a large clamp and tightened it just tight enough to hold them all together. Next, we'll take a tape measure and pencil to make small marks on each board at 4 inches from the ends. We'll then place an assembled base with its pocket hole side facing inward, its cheated pocket holes bored down, and line up its outer base with the marks we just made. Adjust the base side to side until it's centered and each side is the same measurement from the sides of the tabletop boards and make marks. Now we can make marks along the base where we'll drill pocket holes for connecting the base to each board. Because of the current pocket hole screws, we're going to cheat to the outside of the outer boards. We'll also cheat a bit inside on the inner boards to avoid the screws as well. We can then mirror the marks on the other base. Here's where it gets a bit weird. For the pocket holes, we'll use the 1.5 inch settings on the jig and drill for the far outside marks. The screws coming into this board are at a deep enough angle so that we don't have to worry about hitting them. Then we'll drill holes along the horizontal board, which will create some pretty ugly grooves. But I'm not worried about it because it'll be underneath and out of sight. For the inner marks on the outside boards, we'll switch the jig and screw settings to 3/4. This will let us avoid the screws coming in and require a 1.25 inch screw rather than a 2.5 inch. Now we can place the base on the tabletop boards, lined up along the marks previously made. Screw 2.5 inch screws in each outer side while pressing firmly on the base to prevent it from moving. The horizontal board will take 2.5 inch screws and the shorter pocket holes on the outer boards will use 1.25 inch screws. Now that the table is fully assembled, we can plug the pocket holes, at least the ones that will be visible. For this, we'll need wood glue, wood filler, and pocket hole plugs. First, we'll fill a bit of each hole, except the short ones, with wood filler. then a bit of wood glue in each opening before we finally shove in the plugs. If needed, you can tap the plugs in more with a hammer or mallet. Let the wood filler and glue set for 24 hours before sanding them down with 150 grit and 220 grit. You'll then want to wipe the entire table down with a damp towel or rag to remove any remaining sand dust. We can then stain or paint. I chose to stain with the same mixture I used on the patio chairs in my previous video. Starting with the bottom of the table, I used an old cotton sock to apply the stain, let it set for about 5 minutes, then wiped it away with either a clean part or a new sock entirely. I'm not worried about ruining the bottom, since it'll be on the ground and never seen, so I flipped it over as soon as I was done and did the top. For the cracks, I used a foam brush with the foam removed and wrapped the thin plastic piece with a used but not newly wet part of a sock. Allow the stain to set for 24 hours before moving on to the next step. Final step is applying a protective coat of polyurethane to the top. I used a water-based polyurethane with a semi-gloss finish. You can use a regular brush, but I prefer a foam brush because it's easier to avoid leaving brush marks. Apply a small amount and brush back and forth along the grain. Go against the grain on the edges before brushing from the center out. When you've used up most of what's on the brush, you can apply a bit to the end without worrying about it dripping. Once you've applied a full coat, do a single brush stroke across the top to smooth it out and get rid of any excess. You'll want to do one board at a time because you'll want to be able to coat the whole board and rid it of any bubbles before it dries. Let the first coat dry for a few hours before applying a second coat. Then let that set for 48 hours before using it. And with that, you've got a matching table to go with your patio furniture. I hope this video was helpful, and thank you so much for watching.